This month's podcasts are sponsored by Aubergine Legal. Do you sometimes worry that your business isn't meeting all its legal compliance requirements and wonder if you're ticking all the legal boxes? Are you losing sleep worrying about a piece of legislation that you may or may not be complying with? Perhaps you need some help with your client contracts or your data protection compliance. Or maybe you're worried that your website doesn't have the right documents or legal notices in the right place. Perhaps you have a brand that you want to protect with a trademark. How about if you could outsource it all and eliminate all of your worries? If so, then get in touch with Aubergine Legal, a friendly commercial legal consultancy offering practical and clear commercial legal advice without the overwhelming legal jargon, taking the worry away and helping you to protect your business and minimise your risks. Aubergine offers a free 30-minute consultation if you have any questions or want to find out if they can help, and you can access this link and book your free 30-minute call via the link in the show notes.
Welcome to the Bring Your Product Ideas to Life podcast. Practical advice and inspiration to help you create and sell your own physical products. Here's your host, Vicki Weinberg.
Hi, and thank you so much for being here. I'm actually recording this episode on the week that it goes out. I'm just recovering from COVID at the moment. I've been pretty much bedbound actually for the past week. So recording this first thing in the morning when I've got my energy levels were their highest. So yeah, really excited to be here and talking to you. I wanted to record an episode taking you through the steps in the product creation process. I know that often in conversations with guests and solo episodes that I do, we often just touch on pieces of this. So I thought it might be really useful for you to put all of those pieces together and have an overview of the entire process. As I record this, I do actually realise that over the past year, I've spent much more of my time on some elements in this process than others, which is quite an interesting realisation for me, actually. But anyway, this will be a fairly brief run through. In the show notes for this episode, which you can find wherever you're listening, so whether that's on my website or in a podcast player, if you click on either details or information, you can hopefully find the show notes. If you ever have any problems accessing these, please do let me know and I can point you in the right direction. So in those show notes, there's going to be links to other relevant podcast episodes and blog posts that go into some of the things that I talk about in much more detail. There are actually so many resources for this episode for you to look at, depending, what area you're at or anywhere you're stuck or anything you need to find more information on. So hopefully, whatever point you're at, if you have any questions, there'll be a resource somewhere that will answer it. And of course, if not, you can always contact me directly, vicky@vickiweinberg.com, and that's Vicky with an I. And I also should say that this process might look a bit different for you depending on your product. So for example, if you're making your products yourself, some of these steps I talk about won't possibly be relevant, but I still think there will be something in this episode for everyone. So with all that said, I'm just going to start talking you through the steps. So something I think you need to do very early on in the product creation process is define what your product is and who it's for. And I think this is really something really important to think about. And it sounds really obvious, but sometimes just putting on paper, what is your product? What problem does it solve, if it solves a problem, and who's it for, can be really useful. I did an episode last year talking about your USP or unique selling point, and I think this is absolutely key. And it might be, by the way, that you don't know what your USP is right now. You might be listening to this and thinking, Vicky, I've got absolutely no idea, but that's fine too. These steps that I'm taking you through don't need to necessarily be in the exact order. I kind of struggled a little bit with ordering them and then just thought, you know what, everyone's process will be slightly different and some people will do things in a different way. So I've just kind of gone with what seems logical, but don't get too hung up on that. Please don't, because you really don't need to. And if you don't know what your unique selling point of your product is, or you're not sure exactly who it's for, don't worry, you can work this out during your research. You don't have to know everything right now. These are just good questions to start thinking about at the outset. And if you're thinking, actually, I don't have a USP, well, I think I'd argue that every product does, even if the USP is you. So let's say you're making your own products. Let's say you're an artist or you make jewellery. Maybe what makes your products unique is you. There's something about the process you use or the materials or just the fact they're made by you and not somebody else. You are your USP, because whatever you are creating, it is not going to be identical to someone else's, because everyone has their own processes and does things differently. So yeah, please don't get too hung up on this. These are just things I want you to think about at the beginning. Something else that I think is really important to do is validating your product idea. So what I mean by this is talking to people who might buy your products, your potential customers, and finding out what they want and what they need from products like yours. So obviously knowing who your customer is key. It makes it a lot easier to make sure you're talking to the right people. I've actually spoken about validating your ideas a lot. I'm really keen on this. I even have a free guide with some free ideas and a whole podcast episode on this when I actually spoke to an expert in customer research. And this is a really important step, and please don't miss this. You've probably heard me say this before, but please don't just ask your friends and family if they think your idea for a product is a good one. So that when I talk about validating your idea, I don't mean find some people to tell you that it's good, because, well, for a few reasons. One, if you're asking your friends and family, it might go one of two ways. So it might be that they say what they think you want to hear. They care about you, they want to be supportive, so they'll say, yes, this is a brilliant idea, this is a great product, I'd buy this, loads of people want to buy it. Or they might be overly cautious because, depending on their personality, and they might think, oh, this is a bit risky, and then they might sort of put you off a little bit. And I'm definitely not saying don't listen to the opinions of your friends and family, and I'm not even saying don't speak to them. But what I am saying is the people whose opinions you really need to take into account are the people who potentially would buy your product. And it might be that actually you are your ideal customer. So perhaps you are a parent and you're creating a product to other parents. You might think, well, actually, I know all about this because, I am someone who would buy my product. Even if that's the case, please do speak to some other parents in this example in the same situation. Hopefully you'll know lots of them and get their opinions too. If you don't know the kind of people who might buy your product in real life, maybe you can find them in Facebook groups or in other online groups or even offline groups now that networking and other events are starting up again. And I'm not suggesting you do anything as formal as a focus group, but I think, asking questions like, if you were buying a product like this, what would it need to do or be to meet your expectations? You can also ask, have you ever bought a product like this? Like, let's say you're looking to launch a product for new parents, say. Well, actually, let's use another example. Let's say candles, because I can use this throughout the episode. Let's say you're looking to create a range of candles. You can start asking people, do you buy candles? What sort of price do you pay for them? What are you looking for when you're buying them? What scents do you like? How do you like them to look? You can ask all kinds of questions, and you can also do all of this without giving too much away. If your product is something that you think, actually, this is a bit sensitive. Let's say you've got a really original idea and you're a little bit worried about someone else potentially taking that idea. Maybe it's an idea you think you might need to patent. And I should mention that I have an episode coming up all about this topic that will be really, really useful. So if that is you, hold on a few weeks, because this episode is really going to help you. But and maybe, you're not looking to patent your idea. Maybe it's just that you want to keep it a bit close to your chest. That's fine. You can obviously do that. Although to be honest though, the best way to validate your idea, and I know this goes against what I've just said, but depending on your product, you'll know which of these approaches is best for you. But for some products, the best way to validate your idea might actually be to see if anyone would actually pay for it. Because if people will actually give you money for your product, that's kind of, that's a really strong endorsement. So, you might take pre-orders, you might organise a small initial batch, like let's say you make jewellery and you're thinking of branching out to a different type of product. Maybe you make a few, you try and sell them, you see if people buy them, you get feedback from them, and you take it from there. Asking for money is actually the best way to check if someone will actually buy your product. As I say, I have other episodes and blog posts all about this topic. It is quite a big topic. There are so many ways to validate your ideas. I should also mention I have an episode coming up about crowdfunding, if that's something you're interested in, because of course that's another way of validating your idea, by seeing if people are willing to pay for it. And of course, by them paying for it, they actually help to fund your idea. But again, I'm not an expert in crowdfunding, which is why I'm speaking to an expert. So that episode is also coming up in the next few weeks, so keep an eye out for that one too. And then, as well as looking at thinking about your customers and thinking about what their needs are for their product and what they want for it, it's also really important to carry out some market research and look at other products that are actually out there already. So this is really easy to do online. I don't know how many of us are actually going into shops at the moment. If you are, that's great. But if you're not, you can do this kind of research online really easily. And in fact, it's a little bit easier online anyway, because not so much for getting a feel for the product, but for getting an idea of what, people think about it. So for example, I like looking on Amazon. That probably won't surprise you, because for many reasons, but one is that there's just so much information there. If you're selling a product that you think might end up on Amazon at some point, it is a really good place to look. And even if you're not, there are so many reviews, which is really helpful. You can also get an idea of the price that people are paying for products. As I say, reviews are absolutely invaluable. They'll tell you so much. They'll tell you what people like about products. They'll tell you what they don't like. And something else you can do as well is maybe even buy a few products to look at, and you can always return them if you keep them in good condition. I'm sure I've shared this before, but when I launched my first product, I ordered some similar ones online so I could photograph them. And I actually kept them for a little bit longer as well. In fact, I'm not even sure if I did return all of mine in the end. I'll explain why a bit later on. But I think that's a really good thing to do. And if your products are handmade, then maybe Etsy's a better marketplace to look at. Again, there are lots of reviews on Etsy. It's just a really good idea to have an idea of the market. So is your idea original, or are lots of people selling something very similar to your product already? And if they are, that isn't to say that you shouldn't sell it, but is there something you can do to your product to make it different to everyone else's? This is coming back to the USP again. So let's say you're selling a certain type of earring on Etsy and you can see there are people selling similar earrings already. Is there something you could do to yours to make yours different? So whether it's the size, the materials you use, whether they're gold or silver, or maybe the production processes that you use to hand make them. There's all kinds of things. And this is again coming back to reviews. Well, reviews are great because it might be that you look at products very similar to yours, whatever marketplace you're looking on, and you see some reviews and you see people are saying, I don't know, this is too small, or the material is really scratchy, or these earrings hurt my ears, or I don't know what the thing is, or this candle smell, has a certain smell, or it brings off smoke, or I don't know what the thing is. These are just some examples off the top of my head, but you can use what people are saying about products similar to yours to help refine yours and get it the best it could be. And once you've done all of this research, and I appreciate that I've gone through this very quickly, but I'm not suggesting this is a quick process, but I do think it's something worth spending the time on. I know it might seem a bit like overkill, but I promise that it is worth it. And then you can use what you've done then to make your product the best it can be and kind of finalise, the specification for your product. So the questions I think you could give some thought here are, how does my product meet my customer's needs? And it might be that the needs of your customer are just, I don't know, something, maybe you make jewellery and all your customer wants is, they're looking for something to make them feel more polished, or to liven up an outfit, or just to make them smile and happy. Whatever that thing is, it doesn't need to be particularly deep, although some products of course do solve a particular need. I have a guest on in a few weeks who's talking about a product they made to help feed babies with feeding problems. That product solves a very distinct need. If yours doesn't, then that's not a problem. And as I spoke about earlier, it's also thinking about how can you improve on the products already on the market, if there are any. And maybe it's not even improve, actually. Maybe I've used the wrong word here. Maybe it's more about just making your product distinct. So it's coming back to that USP again. So if you are writing a specification because you are looking for somebody else to manufacture your product, you need to make sure that it's detailed enough that you're giving a potential supplier everything they need to be able to quote for your product correctly. You don't need to share designs or anything that's confidential, give it all away at this stage, but they will need to know some basic details in order to give you an accurate quote. And even if you're making your products yourself, I still think a product specification will still be helpful. So you may have to source some ingredients or components. So for example, if you make candles, you might need to source jars or scents, and it's always good to have this. It will also come in useful when you're writing your product description a bit further down the line. And of course, if you're making something creative, so art or jewellery, perhaps you work in sort of more intuitively, and maybe you don't need a specification. I'll leave that to you to judge, because you know your products and you know yourself and your processes. I think for lots of us, having something written down, even if it's just the materials you use, rough sizes, helpful components, but if that isn't for you, then like I say, this isn't like a set in stone formula that will apply to everyone, because we're all different, our products are all different. This is more like a template for you to use as is relevant and appropriate for you. I think at this stage it's a good idea to think about whether you need a patent or any other kind of protection for your product. As I said, I'm not an expert here, and it's actually next week's episode is going to be with an inventor, Mandy Haberman, and she has lots and lots of information to share on this. If you have any kind of product where you think actually someone might copy this, or I'm worried that someone else might try and replicate what I'm doing, please listen to this episode. It really is one not to miss. So the next thing I like to do, and as I say, this is different for everyone, but this is the stage where I like to make a decision on what I'm going to price my product at. And there's a reason I like to do this now. Is it because, in my opinion, I think I'm more likely to get it right if I do it now, because I've just done lots of market research and I've just asked lots of customers their opinions. So I know what my competitors are charging. So I know where my product fits against theirs. So, for example, for most products, there's going to be a ballpark fix, where the products will fit inside a certain range, and maybe it's between £15 and £20, let's say, depending what you're selling. So based on the specification for your product, you should know where in that ballpark your product fits. So let's say your product is made of more premium materials than your competitors, you're probably going to be at the £20 end of that scale. Whereas if you're deliberately trying to simplify your product, maybe you're using different materials, maybe the production processes will be simpler, maybe there's going to be components of your product that aren't there, maybe the packaging is going to be simpler, whatever it is, maybe you think, okay, I can price at the lower end. I think this is a really good time to do this because you have all of this information. I think the danger of pricing your product later is then you're a bit biased based on the production price, or perhaps your time if you're making the products yourself. But there's not really a production price. Of course, there's a cost of materials, because then you're pricing with the aim of making a profit, and the price that you choose might not be viable. So let's say even you're making your product yourself and you've got all the costs of the materials and you've worked out how long it's going to take you to do this. I actually spoke to somebody on a podcast episode, and apologies, I've spoken to so many people. I forget who it was that was telling me that they were making cards. And apparently, cards, they were made out of card, and then they were laser cutting or by hand cutting out shapes in the card. So obviously the card probably doesn't cost very much to purchase, I assume. I don't know, that's just an assumption. However, she was explaining that the time it took her to make one card, when she looked at what she would have to price the card at, it made no sense at all, because I think it was something like a couple of hours to make one card. Now, there's only so much you can charge for a card, isn't there? There is an upper limit, and actually it just wasn't going to be worth her time. However, if she'd gone the other way and she had worked out, okay, it's taken 3 hours to make this card and the materials cost this and my time is worth this amount an hour, I'm going to, she might have ended up saying, okay, I'm going to charge £60 for this card. I don't know what people's hourly rates are, this just to figure out the air, but obviously no one's going to pay £60 for a card. And that is kind of the danger of pricing the other way around. I'm using another example. Let's say you go to a supplier to get a quote to make your product, and the supplier says, it's going to cost £10 a product, and you know that on Amazon, let's say you're looking on Amazon and everyone else is selling similar products for between £10 and £12, and then you're thinking, well, I'm going to have to charge more than £12 because with the fees I'm not going to make a profit. And then before you know it, you've got the most expensive product in that category. You're charging £15 simply based on your production price, but no one's going to pay that £15 because your product isn't actually that different from the one that's priced at £12 that already has reviews, etc. I'm not sure if I'm making this complicated, but what I'm basically trying to say is, if you do make your pricing decisions now, when you get prices, so either you work out the cost of materials and the time for you to make your product, or you get quotes on suppliers, you can see if a profit is possible really early on. And if not, then, you can do something about it. So you could perhaps try other suppliers, whether that's for materials or to make your product. You could perhaps look at sourcing your product in a different country. Like, let's say you were looking to have it made in the UK and you find out actually that's not viable. You then can make a decision. Are you happy to source your product overseas, which we'll talk about a bit more later? Can you tweak your specification? Could you use different materials? Is there something you can do? Or it might be that at this stage, and I really hope this doesn't happen, but it could be that at this stage you go, actually, this just doesn't work, because when I look at the costs and when I look at what I can sell it for, I'm just not going to make a profit. And I really hope that doesn't happen. And if you get to this stage and that does, don't be despondent, because you've had one product idea, you're really likely to have others. So please don't give up. So the next thing I think is to do, and as I say, don't have to stick to this order, is to speak to designers and think about branding and logos. This is definitely optional depending on what your product is, but I think you'll likely need a logo at the very least. So even if you're selling sort of handmade products on Etsy, most of the purchases that I make on Etsy, you do get a little sort of thank you card or something with a logo on there, and that's possibly something that you can do yourself. I use 99 Designs for my logos and branding. I had an episode very recently with Cara Bendon, who's a branding expert, who talks about the importance of branding. That's definitely one to listen to. And yeah, I know that at this stage it might not be possible to spend a lot of money on having a brand created and everything designed for you, but I think as a starting point, even if you do use a tool like, I keep saying Canva, but I think Canva is great, a free tool like Canva, and do something yourself, that could definitely be an interim measure. And then further along the line, perhaps you could redo your branding. I know how, I definitely know how it is when you start out. There's so many costs, there's so much you have to pay for, and you definitely don't have to do everything at once. When I started this consultancy, for example, and I know it's different because the consultancy is a service business, but I actually did my branding pretty cheap. I had a logo done, and then I sort of worked out the rest myself. And it's only now, in the couple of years in, I've actually paid for a full rebrand, because I was at the point where I felt my business was established enough and it sort of felt like the right time. I should say as well, if you are looking to have a product that's going to have particular packaging, so for example it's going to come in a nice box or a bag or whatever it is, that might be worth investing in someone to design it for you, because packaging design is quite a skill and not something that all of us will be able to do. So just want to put that out there, but obviously this would all depend on your situation. So I think a good thing to do is start to think about where you'd like to source your product, or perhaps the components to make your product if you're making them yourself. I put ideally in brackets here, because what I mean by this is it really depends on what you're looking to sell, because you can't get everything in the UK. So not everything is made in the UK, and not everything can be sourced in the UK, assuming you're listening to this from the UK. I did a whole episode on sourcing your product in the UK versus overseas. I think it might be a little bit out of date now, if I'm honest, after Brexit and all the supply delays, and things have changed a lot actually since I recorded that. I probably need to do an updated episode on that soon. But I think it's worth weighing up your options here, and perhaps looking into multiple scenarios. So for example, if you are looking at something that you can get made or sourced in multiple countries, it might be worth looking into more than one, and then you can compare cost, you can compare quality, lead times, and then make a decision, because I do think this can be something that people get a little bit overwhelmed by. I know I certainly did at the outset, and when I was looking to source my first product, I was really a bit baffled by the whole thing, and where should I get it made. And in the end, my first production run was in China, because that seemed quite accessible. I used Alibaba, which is a sourcing platform, which made it quite easy. I then looked at moving my production to Turkey after that, but for me, sourcing in Turkey initially just didn't feel as accessible, and actually that only became an option once I started networking and I started meeting people and they introduced me to their suppliers. And that's how that became possible. But so that's the other thing to say with this actually, is you're not making a decision forever. So if you decide, actually, I want to make my products in the UK, and you do that, and then you find out actually the costs aren't working and you need to look at sourcing them somewhere else, you can do that. You can change your production. Don't think that the decisions you make now, you have to stick to forever and ever, because you really don't. So once you've got an idea of where you're going to be looking, it's then starting actually looking for suppliers. And as I say, remember, this applies to all your components, your packaging, maybe your ingredients. So if you're using candles, making candles, for example, is there one type of essential oil or wax that's better for your product? So it might be you're looking more at the actual product than the suppliers, but you need to start doing some research. Again, I did a whole episode on this because it's a really big topic. My main advice here is to be really thorough. There is absolutely nothing wrong with using Google to find suppliers, to verify if they're actually real companies. You can get Google reviews now. You can get reviews for most things, can't you? And you can also work with a sourcing agent if you feel a bit overwhelmed by actually doing this yourself. You can find sourcing agents online. You can find them on platforms like People Per Hour, Fiverr probably. You might not want to do this. And if whoever you do work with, obviously you need to make sure that they've got great reviews themselves. But using your networks is another really good tip here as well. As I said, I found a new supplier when I wanted to change production for my first products through someone I met at a network. I have a client who's managed to find a sourcing agent to work through one of her networks. So I think I've spoken about this before, haven't I? The importance of networking and connecting with people doing similar things to you. It might be that people actually don't want to share their supplier information, and that's fair enough, because they've worked really hard to find that supplier and build that relationship. But then again, there will also be people who are happy to share that with you, and as long as you're not expecting anyone to sort of start sharing these things with you. If you ask from a place of knowing that there's a very good chance they won't actually be happy to share, and you're comfortable with that, then by all means ask. So once you've started, perhaps you've got a list of suppliers that you think, okay, these all look really good, I'm going to start contacting them. Then you need to prepare some sort of communication. If you're looking just for components or ingredients, then you may not need to do this, but then again you might, and you'll know that better than me. I should say that there's an episode on this, and I'm sorry because I've said that quite a lot this episode. So what you're looking for here basically is a brief so tight that anyone looking at it knows exactly what you want. And I spoke about this a bit earlier when I sort of spoke about finalising your specification. You also need to ask any sort of deal breaker questions that you really need to know. So if there's anything that would prevent you from working with someone, so let's say it's minimum order quantity, let's say you only want to order 100 of something, and if they say you have to order 1,000, then they're not the supplier for you. Make sure you ask that. If you need them to be able to package your product in-house, and that's a deal breaker, ask that. I don't suggest in your initial communication asking loads of questions. I'll be honest, I used to do this, but it's a process and you learn. But what I've learned actually is at the outset, it's kind of more important to ask your, 1 to 3 key questions, because a lot of it is about relationship building, and I think it's definitely worth. There is going to be a back and forth. There should be a bit of conversation. So I think at the outset, when you first start reaching out to suppliers, I think the first thing is sort of working out, okay, who are the ones that aren't going to work out, kind of almost disregarding those. I don't know if that's a harsh way of saying it, but that's kind of the key of when you first start reaching out to people, is going, okay, of all of these people, who is not going to work for me? And then there'll probably be a handful that you can then move forward with. So let's say we started contacting them. I'll be honest, this is where it gets real, this is where it gets scary. Start sending those specifications out, see what comes back. If you are looking to source products, let's say you're listening in the UK and you're looking at UK suppliers, I do think it's worth emailing them, because even if you phone, in my experience, most people will say, actually, could you send that on email? But if you're comfortable, I would also follow up with a phone call. It just gives you a really nice opportunity to find out more about the person you'll be working with. A bit easier to build a relationship. It's also always easier to ask questions on the phone than it is to go back and forth on email. It's always a lot quicker. Of course, if you're looking to source overseas, that might not be possible. I suggest at the outset, so let's say, I always suggest you contact us. I should say this actually. I always suggest you contact quite a lot of suppliers, because you'll be amazed at how many just aren't going to work, either because they can't meet your spec, or for various other issues. So an issue I've encountered when sourcing products abroad sometimes is communication. So sometimes that might be a language barrier. So it might be that I feel the person I'm speaking to perhaps doesn't fully understand what I'm looking for, or it might be that they take a long time to respond to me, and that obviously can happen wherever you're sourcing. It might be, you send an email and it's been 2 weeks and you haven't heard anything back. So possibly, that isn't a good indication of a positive long-term relationship. So I suggest disregarding all of those people initially, because like I said, we are looking for a long-term relationship. And I also would say right at the outset, disregard anyone who can't meet your spec. And I know this might sound really obvious, but I think it can be really easy to get swayed. So you've spent all this time, you've done loads of research, and then you've got this specification for your product and you know exactly what you're looking for. It's amazing how easy it can be to get, to kind of get a bit knocked off course here. So for example, my first product was 100% bamboo swaddles, and when I started contacting suppliers, I got a lot of people come back and say, I can't do 100% bamboo, but I can do 80% bamboo, 20% cotton, for example, or I can do organic cotton. And the amount of time I spent thinking, would 80% bamboo work? Does it have to be 100%, or does it have to be bamboo anyway? Could it be cotton? Which is really silly, because I'd spent so much time coming up with my ideal product, writing it down, and then just because somebody who looked good online was saying, actually I can't do this, but I can do this, I was then questioning it. Don't do that, because you know exactly what you want. Please don't get swayed, unless it's something different. For example, somebody says, you're looking for a certain production method, let's say, and someone comes back and says, actually, I can't do that production method, but I can do this one, and this is why I think it would be good, and this is why I think it could work. Perhaps they suggest a printing method that's perhaps cheaper than the one you were thinking of. Then that's something to weigh up. But the core of what your product is and does and is made of, I would say don't be swayed on that. It is time to be ruthless. Being ruthless is not in my nature. That story that I shared with you just now probably really makes that clear. I wasn't very good at this when I did it the first time round. I obviously got better as I went along, but the first time I went outsourcing products, I have to say, I don't think I was great at sort of disregarding anyone. I just was too nice and was like, I don't really want to say no to you, but you can't do that. So the next sort of thing to do, or one of the next things to do, as I keep saying, even though I say it's the next thing, don't be beholden to this order, is to narrow down a few suppliers. You found a few people that you think you could work with, the price looks good, what they can do looks great, you think they can meet your spec. Narrow it down to a few and then order some product samples. I always suggest ordering two to three samples from suppliers that you feel happy placing an order with, assuming that your sample is up to standard. So even if you're just looking for materials to make your product, or components, or perhaps you're even just looking at packaging, let's just say you're making your products yourself, but you're looking to package them in a specific type of box or envelope, please still order samples. It's so important, because you want every piece of your product to be great. I know I've shared this product before, but my first product was actually a really good product, but the packaging wasn't up to scratch, because I never ordered a packaging sample and didn't realise how flimsy it was, and my boxes were literally falling apart, which meant the products inside were getting ruined. I had no idea this was going to happen. I got lots of complaints, as you can imagine, and returns, and that could have been avoided if I had just paid a little bit more money to get a packaging sample. Speaking about money, some people will charge you for a sample, some won't. If you're ordering sort of materials to make your product, it's possible that you will have to pay for them. If you are looking for a product sample that's customised, so you're not just looking for a supplier to send you something similar they've made for another customer, you're actually looking for something bespoke, there will likely be a fee for that. If you're just happy to have, a sample of their previous work, then some suppliers will send you that for free, or maybe they'll ask you to pay shipping. It really depends. And then when they arrive, you need to compare the samples you have with each other. So it's great comparing like for like, as you know, it's just the easiest way. If you have similar products at home, or perhaps you ordered similar products when you were doing your research at the outset, you can compare to those two. I mentioned earlier that some of the sample competitor products I brought, I kept hold of, and the reason I kept hold of them is because I wanted to compare them against the samples I was getting, just to see how they held up. If your product is something that you can use or wear, then do it. So, wear it, wash it, play with it, whatever it does, use it and see how it stands up to day-to-day use. So, you want to basically find any potential issues before a customer does. So, any product samples you have, you actually want to use them. Maybe you can ask other people to use them. Maybe you can show them to other people. Perhaps if there's something, you can't decide between two samples, there's something you're not sure about, maybe you can ask other people for their opinions. If it's something visual, maybe you can share on social media if you feel comfortable doing that, and ask people, do you like this or this? It all depends on the, what your product is and does. But I think any input you can get from your ideal customers at this stage is a really good thing. If you are sourcing abroad, you will then need to figure out how to get your products here. Again, there is a whole episode on shipping, which is really worth a listen. Shipping is a minefield. There's a lot to get your head around. If you are looking to source your product abroad, I think this is an episode really worth listening to. You might want to think about shipping before you actually place an order, because if you are looking to ship from overseas, the shipping terms will impact on your final product cost, and obviously this is something you'd want to know before you commit to ordering, which is why I mention it now. And then let's say you have chosen a supplier based on the samples you've looked at, you've worked out how you're going to get your product to you. It's decision time, and it's time to order if you're ready, which is super exciting. And this is actually the point as well where, say you wanted to haggle a little bit on price, I say haggle, negotiate is probably a better word, on price or order quantity. This is probably the time to do it, in my opinion, because you've been having some conversations with suppliers. Perhaps you've ordered samples of their product. They kind of know that you're in, that is something you're genuinely interested in. I personally think there's no better time to actually sort of talk about, is there any leeway on the price, or is there any leeway on the outright order, because they know that you're genuinely interested. Whereas if you go to them at the outset and you ask for a price, the very first, one of the first communications you have, and then they say, oh, this is the price, and then you say, can you do it cheaper? I don't really feel that they're going to be that incentivized to give you a better price. They don't know you. Probably everyone, or most people, that contact them, have these kind of conversations, there's no relationship. Whereas I think if you've seen their product, you're happy with it, you've been having some conversation, you're starting to build a relationship, I think that is definitely the best time to ask for some sort of discount or negotiation on quantities if you need that. And then another thing might be is the supplier might actually say, well, no, I can't do that. But what you could say is, okay, are you prepared to give me some sort of discount or quantity change or whatever it is on my second order? I've seen that happen quite a bit as well, because sometimes suppliers might be worried, okay, we can give you a really good price and you might make one order from us, then you'll never come back. But perhaps you can agree, and you can always have this in writing, that when it comes to the second order, the price will be slightly reduced, or the quantity will be reduced, or whatever it is you're looking for. Speaking about shipping, coming back to this, it's now quite a good time to think about where and how you store and ship your product. You need to have a bit of a plan for this. So will you store products yourself in your house, in your garage? Will you send your products to customers yourself? How will you do this? Will you go to the post office every day? Will you have Royal Mail come and collect from your house? Will you use couriers? Will you use a fulfillment centre? It's time to start thinking this kind of thing through. It might depend on the marketplace you use. For example, if you use Amazon, there is the opportunity for Amazon to store and distribute your stock for you. Although a tip I have here is if you are thinking of using Amazon FBA, which is what Amazon calls this, I would not send 500 units to Amazon's warehouses, because if your products don't sell as quickly as you'd like, that's an awful lot of stocks out there. And also, if you want to sell on multiple channels, and we'll get onto channels in a minute, sales channels, if all your stock is tied up in an Amazon warehouse, you wouldn't believe how hard it is to actually get it back. I say hard, it's not, the process isn't actually difficult, but you pay for it and it takes a long time. So if you have all this stock sat in an Amazon warehouse and then you decide at the weekend you're going to do a farmer's market, you might find yourself stuck because you might not physically be able to get your products in time. Do you know, actually something that happened to me, I don't know if I should really admit this, is I was in the same situation. I was doing a baby show, and all of my products, like all of the things I'm saying don't do, I'm basically saying them because I did them and I know it's not great. I sent all my products to Amazon. They were all in, I had probably thousands of units in an Amazon warehouse. I decided to do a baby show and I needed obviously stock. I had a bit at home, but only so much. I needed more. And I went to Amazon to request some stock to be sent to me, and it said it was going to take 2 weeks and I needed it in like 3 or 4 days. So what I had to do is pretend to be a customer. Well, I was a customer. I basically went onto the Amazon site we all shop on, ordered however many of all my products, and got them sent to me via Amazon Prime, so they'd be at my house the next day. But of course that meant that, well, one, I was paying for my own products, and then I was also having to pay the Amazon fees for dispatching them, and it wasn't great. So that's why I say don't do that, because it's not a good idea. So talking about sales channels, let's think about where you're going to sell your product. There's an episode on this. Just assume that everything I say, really, that there will be an episode for this. And in that episode, I go through lots of different marketplaces and talk about the pros and cons. If you haven't yet decided where you're going to sell your products, I really think it's worth listening to. And do take some time thinking about where you're going to sell your products, because, as you've likely heard me say before, not all marketplaces are right for every product. If you're selling handmade products, for example, you're possibly going to do better on Etsy than you are on Amazon, let's say, although that does depend on exactly what you're making. There will be marketplaces that will be better from you than others. There are lots of niche marketplaces out there, so marketplaces for parent-owned business, marketplaces for sustainable products, for example. And when I say marketplaces, I'm talking about online. Of course, it might be that you don't want to sell your products online. Perhaps you're looking to wholesale your products. If you are, then do please listen to the episode I did with Therese all about wholesaling. I think that would be a really useful one to listen to and a good place to start. And I also have an interview with Sasha from Cheeky Zebra, who talked about wholesaling her cards and how wholesale is now a huge part of her business. So that's also something else to listen to. But wherever you're going to sell your products, in my opinion, a simple website is a good place to start. So a simple website and one other marketplace, I think, is really good. I don't think you need to be everywhere on day one. I don't recommend it. A website is good for many reasons, and yes, there is an episode on that as well. Okay. So we're almost there, I promise. The next things to think about doing is, so you've worked out where you're going to sell your products. So maybe you have a website you're getting built, or you're building one yourself. You definitely can build one yourself. If you are and it's for e-commerce, I recommend Shopify, because it really is a sort of all-in-one website builder. All the payment stuff's built in. Personally, I found Shopify really easy. And yes, there's an episode about Shopify as well. As I said, there really are episodes on everything, I'm finding out as I write this. So, when your product's on the way, this is really the time to get set up, to do some research, to figure out how to get your listing online. So Amazon, for example, isn't always easy to get started on. So I would give yourself lots and lots of time so you're not up against a deadline. I have loads of resources specifically for Amazon, how to get set up on Amazon, things to think about, how to create a great listing. It's all there, and I'll link to that obviously in the show notes. If you're looking at selling on Etsy, then I did an episode with Anna Pantelli. She was on the podcast, it might have been last year now actually, but it's a great episode. She's a really good person to follow on Instagram, and she also has some courses opening soon. She has so much knowledge on Etsy, so I do recommend taking a look at Anna. Wherever you're going to be selling your products, you'll need to write a product description. It's really important that you write this for the marketplace you're selling on, and obviously that will be different for each marketplace. If you're selling on Amazon, for example, which, as you know, I know very, very well, there's a set format for product descriptions you need to follow. It's also really important wherever you sell your products that you do keyword research, and that again will be different for every marketplace. If this is something that's completely, feels, very complicated, and because this is a really important thing to get right, my advice would be use an expert. Find someone who's an expert in writing product listings for the marketplace you're looking at and get some help. If you're looking at Amazon, I can obviously help you with this. If you're looking for another marketplace, if you need help with this, let me know and I'll see if I can find the right person for you. And you will also need good product photography. Again, you can do this yourself, and maybe you feel like this is something that you can do. If not, you can always use a photographer. I have a blog post about taking your own photographs for using online, and also an interview with a product photographer, which I think will be a really good listen as well. So that is it. I don't mean to make it sound overly simplistic. In fact, I'm not even sure if I have. This has turned out to be a much longer episode than I thought it would be. And I'm sorry if I sound really out of breath as well. I don't think I've talked this much for a really long time. So I don't know if you can pick up. There have been quite a few pauses where I've had to breathe a little bit. But I know there are lots of steps, but it is a process. You can follow it along. You can follow step by step. You don't have to do the steps in this order. I have a product creation checklist, which might be really useful, that outlines all of these steps. It's literally just a sheet that you can work through and tick things off as you do them. That might be really helpful. That's linked up in the show notes. I've also in the show notes, I'm linking to all of the relevant podcast episodes that I've spoke about. Although, to be honest with you, if you're at the beginning of your product creation journey, you're somewhere in this process, I would say the majority of episodes will be really helpful, because when I speak to guests, often it's this stage that we focus on as well. I also have some online courses specifically on product creation. So one is just about the first bit, so researching your idea, and the second, the full course, takes you through the research stage and everything up until having your product ready to order. I also offer product creation power hours, where we can spend an hour on Zoom together and you can ask me your questions, or we can work through something together, whatever you need. And this year I'm also launching one-to-one programs where we would meet every week, and I would sort of go through the next step in the process with you. You would go off and actually do some work, but you'd obviously have access to me in between calls, and we basically work through creating your product together. So if you're interested in any of those, you can find more information on my website, vickyweinberg.com, also linked in the show notes. You can email me at vicky@vickyweinberg.com, and yeah, I'm always really happy to hear from you, always really happy to help you. I hope you found this episode useful. If you have any suggestions for other things you'd like me to talk about, then of course just get in touch and let me know. And do remember to share this episode with your friends or anyone else you think would benefit from listening. So thank you so much, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end of this episode. If you enjoyed it, please do leave me a review. That really helps other people to find this podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, and do tell your friends about it too if you think that they also might enjoy it. can find me at vickyweinberg.com. There you'll find link to all of my social channels. You'll find lots more information, all of the past podcast episodes, and lots of free resources too. So again, that's vickyweinberg.com. Take care, have a good week, and see you next time. If you've been inspired to start a podcast in 2024, I really recommend my podcast host, Captivate. Captivate were my top pick when I started podcasting 4 years ago because of how easy it was for a complete novice like me to get started. I've stuck with them for the last 4 years because Captivate is still really simple to use. They keep adding great new features like the ability to share ads like these, and they've just been really reliable. So when you're ready to start your own podcast, you can use the link in the show notes and get a free 7-day trial with Captivate.